Welcome to the Concordia Publishing House Podcast, where we consider everything in the light of Jesus Christ, who is the same yesterday, today, and forever. I'm your host, Elizabeth Pittman. As a Christian leader, you can trust that God is in control of your leadership journey, even when you can't see around the bend to know what's coming next. On this episode, we're joined by Jim Sanft. Jim is the CEO of Concordia Plan Services and the author of Leading by Faith. In this conversation, Jim shares insights and lessons learned from his more than 25 years of executive leadership experience. Before we start our conversation with Jim, I'd like to thank our friends at the LCMS Foundation for their support of the podcast. Imagine a future where your God-given gifts continue to benefit your family and faith after you're called home to heaven. The LCMS Foundation can help you create a gift plan so that your assets, things like your retirement accounts, home or land, will leave a lasting impact on the people you love and the ministries you care about the most. Visit lcmsfoundation.org/podcast to learn more about starting your own gift plan. Jim, welcome to the CPH podcast.
Thank you. Thanks for having me on.
I've been waiting for this conversation since we first started talking about the book that you were thinking about writing way back when. And Now we are at a point where the book is in print. It's about to be made available to people. What's it like being a first-time author?
It's really interesting. For years I've heard people say, that being an author just changes things. And I didn't really know what that meant, and now I know what it does. It's bigger than you really think it's going to be. There is certainly a world of just sort of respect that comes in. I think there's a lot of people who might aspire to write one, but they don't think they can. I had a conversation with someone. It's sort of like I've run a marathon, right, and it wasn't pretty by any means, and people will kind of look at it that way. Oh, I'd always wanted to do it, and you go, well, do it. And I feel like that a little bit with the book too. So there's a lot of people who feel like, oh, I could never do it, and that's some of the things I'm hearing now from people. And it's like, you do have a story, and something that people want to hear your perspective. So it's exciting. It changes things. It changes dialogue with people.
Absolutely. Tell us a little bit about, every leader has their story. And as you say, and sometimes it's just a matter of getting past that hurdle of, you need to do it, you want to do it, and it's just a matter of pen to paper and just starting to do it. Tell us a little bit about your story that led you to the place where you were ready to tell it, and bring that story to life to help other leaders.
I think there were several kind of aha moments. One, I'll begin with another CPH author, my friend Kurt Sensky, who really helped me understand how being an author can help the organization I serve. So people can see the leader who might not meet me, on a regular basis. And he didn't say it this way, but you start to feel sort of this obligation of get the story out there, become known, and particularly then within the church. So people say, wow, there are people who are the good leaders out there within the church body, and we should feel good about these entities that we're doing business with. That was one piece of it. So really give credit to Kurt for that. The other thing was, yes, it's my story, but it's really not my story. It's really, as I look back, it's how God's hand was at everything within my journey. And, within the book, I use that analogy, leadership is a journey, and you just don't see it every step of the way. But when it's done and you can step back and you see how God was preparing you for different moments in different ways. And so I hope that really comes out, that it really isn't my story. It's how God has used, how he prepared me and used me through these years.
You start off at the very beginning and you talk about the fact that we, leading by faith and not by sight. Explain that to us.
Well, I think about, the passage, 2 Corinthians, it says we walk, by faith, not by sight. And we can think about that in our everyday life. And it really hit me. It's the same with leadership. And so, got my advanced copy. I think the cover expresses a bit of my thought on this, and so thank you to CPH for using one of my photographs when my wife and I are out hiking. I just love that imagery of that path that goes forward, and it's always compelling you what's around the bend. You keep going, you're tired, it's been a long day, but what's next? And I feel like that leadership journey is like that, right? You don't know what tomorrow's going to bring. There's no way of knowing. Only God knows what's ahead, but we keep going forward. We go forward with faith. I don't know what's around the bend, but He does, and He's prepared me for whatever comes around the bend. So to me, it just really became a metaphor for how I kind of view that whole leadership journey.
So you talk about not knowing what's around the bend. As you're writing, you talk about the windshield fallacy. Tell us a little bit about that and why you think that. Well, just tell us your thoughts on that.
Yeah, so the first
I enjoyed the story in the book. So
yeah, so the first half of the book, I take on some of those things that maybe people have misperceptions, about leadership, and this one I had a little bit of fun with from a standpoint of, I begin with a quote from Colin Powell, and where he talks about leaders must always be looking out the windshield, and yes, it's inspirational, right? It can pop up nice on LinkedIn as a good meme, and people can feel good about it. But embedded in it, I think, is just that fallacy that we actually can see what's coming up ahead. You cannot. Now, I'm not saying leaders shouldn't prepare. You shouldn't be thinking about what's ahead. But if the leader is only looking out the windshield, there's several kinds of danger there. As I said, you can't see what's up ahead. For us, we don't know what the future holds. But I think even from a theological standpoint, there's some danger in there, because from a personal standpoint, from a person's standpoint, I'm putting myself in the place of God. As leader, hey, come behind me because I see what's ahead, and I'm focused, and I know what the future is going to bring. That's just not true. Only God does. So, I think it's actually really a bad theology. Now, what we can do is we can look out our side view mirrors, or excuse me, our side view windows, and you can see what's around you. What is the situation that you find yourself in? Look to your left, look to your right, understand where you're at. We should look in the rearview mirror, not to live in the past, but my goodness, we need to learn from the past. So those are valid windows for us to look out. Yes, the leader should be thinking ahead, but and anticipating and planning for contingencies. But we need to really avoid that idea that I have, as leader, I have perfect clarity of what's coming, because none of us do. Only God does, and so we lead by faith, trusting in the one who does know what's ahead.
it reminds me of something like my mom always said it to me growing up, but just coming through graduation season, I heard it again. Life is what happens when you're making plans. And so as a leader, if you're always looking through that windshield, your work is moving right along while you're not looking out those left and right mirrors or windows.
Yeah. Well put.
So tell us, it's fun reading your book because it's very readable. And I remember when I was reading the manuscript probably 6 months ago, I was marking it up like crazy because I'm like, this is really good. There's some good stuff here. But you bring in some movie quotes. So we get a little bit, you get some pop culture references in there and some lessons from some of these things. Tell us about a leadership lesson that comes from Indiana Jones.
So I love a point in the movie where Indiana Jones, and so we're not going to use Indiana Jones as any kind of model as leader, right? It's not, they're not a leadership series of movies, but there's this moment where they're surrounded, by the Nazis, and the gentleman he's with, asks him well, what is your plan? And he says, or how are you going to do whatever you're planning to do? And he says, I don't know. I'm making this up as I go. And I love that quote because I've actually used that once with a team member who I don't remember the situation. They're looking at me for some kind of wisdom with whatever we had, and the reality is I had none. I had absolutely none, and I made that same statement to them, and I don't know if it was because I had seen the movie recently or what, and the person was actually shocked. We were able to laugh a little bit, but it really is true. As leaders, we are making it up as we go along, because each one of us are on a leadership journey of something new. I've been appointed by a board of directors to guide, to lead this organization. They come in 4 times a year to conduct their business, and then they expect me to figure it out. And there is no playbook, there is no template, there's nothing I can go to say, what do you do about these situations? You truly make it up as you go along. So, one of my responsibilities as a leader is to just figure things out. We have to figure it out as we go along. Then you have to make a decision. And then when you've made that decision, you have to move forward and execute with excellence. And I think it's really those things that our boards are looking for us to do. Figure it out. If it was all known, if it was all prescribed, if it was algorithmic, they wouldn't need me. You just put the whole organization into play. But the reality is we're making it up as we go along. And that's okay, because we're going to lead by faith. It's not on me. God called me and he prepared me for this moment, and it's actually okay that I'm going to make it up as I go along.
No, I think it's a very humble way to approach things, where you recognize that you are not all knowing and you are not in the place of God, and you're doing the best you can with the skills you have, and using those to evaluate the situation around you to hopefully make the right decision, and as you say, execute with excellence.
Right, yeah, exactly. And it is not an excuse for failing to figure it out, failing to make a decision, and failing to execute.
Absolutely. You started off as an education major at Concordia University, Nebraska, majoring in mathematics. So tell us a little bit about what that background, how your background as a mathematician, which still gives me the shakes because I am not a mathematician, how did that prepare you for leadership, and what lessons have you brought into your current roles because of that background?
Sure, and actually my bachelor's is in education, so secondary education from Concordia University, Nebraska. Go Bulldogs! I have to get the plug in for my alma mater. And so back then, it was a field endorsement in mathematics, so I ended up taking every possible math class I could, so probably an equivalent of a double major in math, but I actually was an education major. Had an opportunity to serve, replacing a teacher who was on sabbatical for a year, so served in one of our Lutheran high schools. And then it was after that God directed me to graduate school. I got a master's in mathematics and statistics from the University of Nebraska. Go Big Red! Another shameful plug for alma mater in there. And then God really put a big twist in my plans, and through divine intervention, he directed me towards becoming an actuary. And I was served in the insurance industry for about 10 years, a little over 10 years, seeing very different parts of the business, and then was really struggling with this idea of I went into professional church work. I never intended to be an actuary, never intended to work in the insurance industry, and there I was. And then one day, Concordia Plan Services, then under the name Worker Benefit Plans, was looking for an actuary. And I felt a sense of call. I felt like, God, now this makes sense. And so I'm looking back at that path again, right? Not knowing what was around the corner. Well, why did you have me? So I went to Lutheran school, not high school, but through elementary school. I went to one of our Lutheran universities. I learned the system. I met people. I started to understand church work, then stepped away and had to learn some very specific things about the insurance industry, get professional credentials. So I'm a fellow in the Society of Actuaries. I'm a member of the American Academy of Actuaries. Go learn some things in industry and then come back and put it to work in the church. And so that's kind of a combination of the degrees and designations. But I think the mathematics education allowed me to progress through the actuarial exams. My master's is actually in an area optimization and operations research, and so I'm probably giving you chills even more. But one of the things that was really interesting there was learning, looking for optimal solutions, not these perfect solutions, but understanding very much the constraints within any system, and then working towards an optimal solution. And even there, it's a little bit different mindset than we generally have as we're coming through our mathematics education in elementary and secondary education. And at the core, it really becomes problem solving. So in my case, it was understanding insurance systems, operations, the insurance funding strategies. It's also a discipline that helps you solve problems. How do you go through that process, get the data you need, and you never have perfect data, right? So you have to make the best decision that you can with what you have, in front of you. So it's a combination of learning the church, and taking a deep dive in insurance and financial services, and then bringing them together in this work here at Concordia Plan Services.
You talk about problem solving. You also, in there, talk about the role of accountability. Tell us a little bit about accountability and how that plays into a leader's role.
Well, I think at the core, accountability is really hard to get a hand on. Everybody says they want to be accountable, but what's it really mean? And I think we have to understand that as leaders, and really this pertains to anybody, whether you're in a leadership role or not. If you've been hired into a position, you're expected to produce results. And I think it's very easy, and I think we frankly see it a lot within the church, where we're content to focus on activities. Well, they were really busy. Well, they tried hard. Well, okay, but at the end of the day, we're called, or we're employed, we're hired to produce results. And so accountability really brings that to the forefront, understanding that this is purposeful. We're not kids out on a playground where you have unstructured play and you can do whatever you want. No, we're a team who's working forward to goals. We need to win, right? The board has hired me to do certain things, and you got to bring home that win. With accountability, we often look at it like the report card, right? In hindsight, we want to look at who to blame. We see that in the media. Any event that comes up, who are we going to blame? Really, I like to, and that's what I call in the book reactive, retroactive accountability. What we want to look for is proactive, right? Going forward into this and saying, okay, understand who is accountable, what are the expectations, and making sure that you get to that right destination. So it isn't so much about who was accountable, but the clarity who is accountable. And then the third step, I would say, as an accountable leader, I want to step up and say, no, I am accountable. All right, whatever happens in the organization here, I am accountable. And it's just that's a really, really hard step to take. But what I find is even if something doesn't go right, people come at it with grace in the church, right? Because you're stepping up, you're owning it, you're looking at how are we going to solve it. What a board is going to do properly running is let's understand the decision process. Did you do the right things the right way? And then if something doesn't go well, then what are you doing to fix it, right? So it's kind of that continuum versus coming into the boardroom and they're wondering what went wrong, and if all I'm doing is pointing fingers, boy, I'm not doing my job as a leader. So you kind of have to move out of that, the retroactive to the proactive, and be looking at this going forward.
So another movie that you brought up was The Lion King. And I've got songs from my kids have watched that many times. And as you share in the book, your sons watched it many times, and I'm sure you have it completely memorized. Tell us about a leadership lesson that you took away from The Lion King.
Yeah, the song that goes through my mind is Simba when he's talking about, I just can't wait to be king. And you think about that, certainly that's a childlike idea. Boy, when I'm the parent, when I'm this, when I'm not going to do it that way. um but we continue to do that in adulthood. you know if I was the boss, if I was this, if I was that, and so that Simba character, I think, carries back through, right? And then you find yourself in one of those positions, and suddenly you go, wow, this isn't at all what I thought it was. you know so I think I said, in the book, about when my boys were younger, and when they found out I was a boss. My dad's a boss. You mean you get to tell people what to do? And so this idea of grandeur, they're a little older when I was named president and CEO, so we didn't have quite that. But it's like, no, it's not about being the boss. It's not about telling people, what to do. The grass isn't greener once you get there. Leadership is hard. It's really hard. So it's just one of those, fallacies. People think that you have all of this great authority, this absolute authority, and it's just not the way leadership works.
My youngest came home one day and they had been working on a project at school, and he said, "Mom, I didn't know you were famous." And I looked at him, I said, "I'm not, but you're on Google." And I said, "Okay, well, let's step back and let's talk about what that really means." So
Yeah.
not quite with you being the boss, but it was just kind of funny how the child mind works.
Right. Right.
Every leader at some point in their tenure is going to run into some sort of crisis. It might be small, it might be really, really significant. What advice do you have for our leaders if they encounter a crisis in their leadership?
Yeah. Thank you for the question, because it's something that it's interesting as I look at my tenure, and so I'm going to back up, and for people maybe go back on the calendar and understand when I became president and CEO of Concordia Plan Services. It was in March of 2008. Now, at that time, we have $3 billion of assets under management, right? And these are assets supporting the retirement payments largely that we're going to be making in the future to retirees. What happens in a few months? We get the global financial crisis, and the value of those assets go from 3 million to 2 million in a matter of weeks. My predecessor would often say to me, everything was fine when I left, Jim. Of course, joking, and he's a good friend, and I have much respect for him. But yeah, all of a sudden there we are. What do you do when 3 million goes to 2 million, and you lose a third of the value? But that means you have to have a 50% growth rate to get it back, to break even. Those are times of crisis. More recently, the global pandemic hits us. What are we going to do? If you had asked me in February 2020, could CPS execute from going from in the office to 100% remote? I said, I know it's not possible. And all of a sudden we have this crisis hit, and we have to get it done. And we got it done, and my team got it done, and they did it with excellence. During those times, I think it's important as a leader that we provide clarity. There's a lot of noise in the financial markets and global financial crisis. There's a lot of noise, right? The nightly news is going through, and you're hearing a lot of things, happening. People losing jobs, businesses closing. So let's get through the noise. Provide clarity. I think for a leader during times of crisis, communicate, right? That's going to be true at any time, but particularly in a crisis. Make sure you're communicating consistently, and you're providing that clarity, amount of calm. You need to keep your focus through all that. I guess it's related to the clarity, but the leader needs to keep the focus. What are we trying to achieve through this? There's nothing you can do about those outside events. There's an amount of perseverance. This is a time of crisis. It's not just a challenge, and we must persevere. And of course, this is a time for leading by faith, because we know God's going to get us through there. So we rely heavily on our faith. I don't think I could be a leader outside of a Christian context. I just don't think I could. Well, I would have to be in an environment where I can talk freely about what is that source of the hope? What is it allowing me to persevere, right? It's because the hope and the confidence that I have in Him who called me into this role. And then that means I get to maintain optimism, right? Because if the leader's head is down, everybody's head's going to be down. But if you can keep that head up, but it's not, hey, rely on me. I've got this all figured out because I didn't know how to get through a pandemic, and there was no book on that. None of us knew how to do that.
Well, speaking of the pandemic, this I think goes to leading during crisis, but it also speaks to the power of relationships that matter for leaders. Tell us a little bit about your trip to Washington, D.C. right before the pandemic, and then what happened following that visit, because I think it's a great story, and it just shows how when you're leading by faith, things happen that you may not expect coming around the bend.
Oh, absolutely. So maybe before I get to that part of the story, let me back up and tell you about an organization, the Church Alliance. So Concordia Plan Services administers the qualified employee benefit programs of the Lutheran Church Missouri Synod. Most, if not all denominations I'm aware of have similar organizations. And we work very closely with our counterparts in those respective denominations. The denominations cover the political spectrum, the theological spectrum. When we come together, though, we don't focus on theology, we don't focus on politics. That's not our place. But we focus on areas of common concern to church benefit organizations, right? I'm not speaking for the LCMS. I'm only speaking for our benefit plans and where we fit. So coming into 2019, the Church Alliance had 3 different pieces of legislation get across the goal line in a year-end package, and it is very hard. You can work for years and not get an issue passed. Even issues where everybody agrees, or I say no one disagrees, and so we found ourselves at a point where we had 3 different pieces pass. And so when that gets done, I had voices saying to me, what, we need to go thank our champions, and cynical Jim. It's like, really, I'm going to go thank them for doing their job? That's what they're supposed to do, pass good legislation, right? And then no, we need to go thank them, right? And so I had the opportunity March, I'm thinking 3rd, 4th, 5th, somewhere in there of 2020, to go back to Capitol Hill, and I was a part of a team that was over on the Senate side. We had some over on the House side. And we went into those Senate offices, had a little plaque for them, thanking them for being a church plan champion. And it was overwhelming that day. In every one of the offices, the senator themselves was there to meet us. And I realized no one ever comes and thanks them. And we're there to thank them, and they're thanking us. Well, what did we give them? We gave them something they could pass. We gave them something that was bipartisan, nonpartisan in nature, right? They could go back and say, well, look, we're doing good for this community. And so it was just an incredible day where we saw that their sincerity in terms of wanting to do more for us. And that's what they said. Now, what are we going to do next? And one of the offices that I was in with was Senator James Langford from Oklahoma, which, by the way, he is an ordained Southern Baptist minister, so certainly has an affinity towards the church. 2 weeks later, the wheels are starting to come off the bus, and the senator reaches out to the Church Alliance and says, "What do you need?" And we said, all that COVID money that's getting thrown around, and particularly looking at what was going to become the Paycheck Protection Program, nonprofits need that too. Nonprofits are small businesses. This is not about propping up religion, it's about preserving paycheck. And Senator Langford and some others then went into action and made sure that that legislation specifically included religious organizations. Then, as the regulations are starting to get written, we found that many were trying to exclude faith-based organizations, and we needed our champions to to step in again and say, hey, when we wrote into the law religious organizations, we actually meant religious organizations, right? And so they came back and helped clarify with the regulation writers, and then we worked through the logistics and that to make sure that this was available. And I'll walk back and see two things coming in very powerfully. One is that power of the gratitude, being humble and not the arrogant, Jim. That was my first reaction, is why am I going there? And you chuckled, but that was just such arrogance on my part to not go back, right? That wasn't my gut feeling. Let's go back and thank them. But what power. But then also this broad community. So it isn't just the benefit program of the Lutheran Church of Missouri Synod, but we've got the multiple Lutheran entities, we have multiple Baptist entities, we have multiple Presbyterians, we have United Methodists, and so even though no one person in Congress is going to necessarily, very few are associated at times with the Lutheran Church of Missouri Synod, virtually everyone is associated with a Church Alliance member. And so when this broad community comes together to talk about just those business matters, it just becomes a very powerful voice. And so there's really two things in the book that come out of that lesson, right? The gratitude, but also the value of the partnership.
When you speak about values, and earlier you spoke about how you don't think that you could work for an organization that was not a Christian organization. Talk to us a little bit about the importance of values to a leader and why they're so important.
I think whether it's an organization or whether it's you personally, really understanding what is it you stand for. What are those things that are important to you? They're foundational. Those are those markers you put in the ground and say, this is who I am. This is what I'm about. This is what's important to me. And whether it be organizational values or whether it be those personal values, then those guide our decisions. What is most important, it's something that I think you really want to reflect on deeply as a leader. What are those values? They're in there, whether you've articulated them or not. And they serve as those pillars, as those guideposts for not just what you're going to do, but how you're going to do it. So they're just, I think, critically important. And whether you're a leader or not, I think taking time to reflect on those values and have those clarity of those things that are important to you.
Over the last number of months, you've been able to travel around the country, and you've spoken to quite a few different groups. Everything from church groups to teachers to you name it, probably more than I'm even aware of. First of all, what has that experience been like to go out and talk to these groups, and what are the common questions that you're hearing from the people in the audience?
Well, one of the things, it comes back to our earlier topic, right, about being an author now. Mm-hmm. So some of these groups I've spoken with before. Mm-hmm. And so I can speak to them about the business of CPS, and that's what they expect. But some of these now I'm going on the stage, or up to the podium as an author. Same guy, but I'm in this different bucket. So it is very interesting. A lot of questions come up in terms of just what compelled you to write it. So I have an opportunity to share some of that story, some of those things that we were talking about earlier. When I'm in different Lutheran LCMS gatherings, one of the questions I get, Elizabeth, is, what's it like to work with the CPH team?
Oh, well, I'll let you answer that for us.
I'm going to tell you on this podcast exactly what I tell them is it was incredible. To work with you, to work with the entire CPH team. when I had this concept in mind, I was looking into different ways of doing it, right? There's self-publishing, and there's people who help walk you through different things. And I spent my time getting educated, and there's pros and there's cons of, different models. But when I came that day to CPH to sit down with you and Jonathan Schultz and the larger team, it just was so overwhelming how partnering with Concordia Publishing House was the best way to go, and by a long shot, right? And so as the journey began of understanding what I needed to do to actually make a book happen, you all were walking me through that whole thing. Just can't say enough about Jamie and the editorial process. That was a piece that, I'll just say there was a lot of fear and trepidation, in terms of, okay, here's the manuscript,
I remember seeing you at a football.
Be?
I think ran into you at a high school football game, and you're like, "I'm about ready to send it in."
Yeah, and I may have said to you at that time, and I'll say it again here now, I feel like you're kind of like back in junior high, asking a girl out for the first time in this fear of rejection. So, I'm handing over this manuscript, and it's like, is Elizabeth going to walk into Jonathan Schultz's office going, "Plus, we got a problem"? So there's a bit of that fear, but there was no need. It was a great process, and what I really appreciated about the editorial process was that strong desire was so evident to retain my voice,
mm-hmm.
and the editing was an iterative process where it was a great job of pointing things out and saying, okay, I get what you're trying to say here, but it's not being said well. Well, yeah, I'm a math guy. I'm not an English guy, so great. Help me say it better. And there are times where she came and said, I just don't even know what you're trying to say here. And it's like, well, okay, now that I look at it, I understand. But always coming back to my voice, making great suggestions on how to do it. And at times it's like, no, that's not how I would say it. But again, that was an iterative process. But the point really was that dedication of to keeping my voice in there, and the authenticity of my voice. I really valued that through the process. Working with the marketing team, working when I described kind of my vision, on leadership, as we talked about earlier. And then I said, well, I have some of these pictures that I take because this is kind of meaningful to me. I know the art team looked at it and they heard it and made the decision, yeah, let's go with that. So that's just all places where this great partnership came through. And so I'm happy to share with anyone, what a wonderful experience has been to work with the CPH team.
Well, I've been fortunate to be in the audience when you've spoken about leadership and leading by faith. And from where I was sitting, it was wonderful to see the reaction, because the people in the audience, they were tracking with you. Some speakers, you can tell that the room is not with you. In the rooms I've been in where you've been speaking, the audience is with you and they're engaged, because I think we all, and you mentioned this earlier, but we all have an ability to lead wherever our station is. We have the ability to step up and lead in the capacity and the vocation that we have. And I think people really want to do it better, and they want to learn from other people. And so by sharing your experiences, it's been really great to see other leaders, because you talk about it, you don't give a playbook. There is no specific playbook like thou shalt do this to be an excellent leader, right. But we need to learn from others and apply it to our own contexts as we lead.
Right. I had a great opportunity shortly after becoming CEO. A board member who shortly thereafter became chairman really encouraged me to seek different executive groups, whether it be YPO, Young Presidents Organization. But then I stumbled across this organization called Vistage. And that really became transformational for me. It was a group of 16 to 18 CEOs here in the St. Louis area. No competitors, all kinds of different industries, different structures. So I'm in a nonprofit, but some of them were private equity. Some of them were, they were the owners. a lot of different perspectives on it, and that community really helped me refine my skills, accelerate my growth. And it's there I really learned that power of hearing someone else's story. So maybe you're manufacturing widgets, and my business has nothing to do with the manufacturing of widgets, but I can hear your story and your struggles, and I can pull out principles that apply to my situation. We'd bring in speakers, and speakers wouldn't tell me how to run a benefit organization. And sometimes it wasn't even that you learned something great and profound, but you took something you kind of knew, and now I'm thinking about it differently, right? And now I can take that back and I can adapt it of sorts. And I hope that my book can serve as that purpose, right? It's not telling anybody what to do, but maybe there can be some things like, yeah, that makes sense to me. It makes sense, but now I'm thinking about it differently, right? But it's not like this profound, oh, I never thought about it, but maybe I never thought about it like that before, right? I think that's powerful.
I think so too. Well, as we wrap up, what encouragement would you leave our listeners with as they think about leading where God has placed them?
Well, so since you brought up the movie thing, let me do two things. One, I got to go close with a movie quote, right? Since you opened that up, and I think about the great philosopher Jimmy Dugan. Now that was the Tom Hanks character, right, in A League of Their Own, not a philosopher, but the manager of the women's baseball team. And in the scene, a player is complaining about, but it's hard. It's hard, and Jimmy comes back and says, of course it's hard. It's supposed to be hard. If it wasn't hard, everyone would do it. It's the hard that makes it great. So yeah, as leaders, parents, husbands, wives, it's hard. It's supposed to be hard. It's the hard that makes it great. So we can persevere. One of the Bible passages, Bible accounts that just hangs with me a lot here now as I think about this, I think about my book. It did play a role in there. I probably played a more prominent role. Think about when Joshua is taking over from Moses. Right? Moses has died. Joshua is now to lead the people. And I love Joshua 1:9, but I'm going to back up to verses 7 and 8. Be strong and very courageous. Be careful to obey all the law my servant Moses gave you. Do not turn from it to the right or to the left, that you may be successful wherever you go. Keep this book of the law always on your lips. Meditate on it day and night, so that you may be careful to do everything written in it. Then you will prosper and be successful. And now verse 9. Have I not commanded you? Be strong and courageous. Do not be afraid. Do not be discouraged. For the Lord your God will be with you wherever you go. Who can lead by faith?
Absolutely. Jim, thank you so much for being with us today to talk about what it looks like to lead by faith. For our listeners, we will link to the book, Leading by Faith, in the show notes. We'll also link to Concordia Plan Services so you can learn a little bit more about what CPS does for us. Jim, as always, it's great to chat with you.
Likewise, thank you. And again, thanks to you and the whole team for the opportunity to get my book out there in the hands, and pray that it'll be a blessing to leaders and emerging leaders across the church.
Absolutely. And I encourage our listeners, go check it out. I think you'll be blessed by it, and it'll help your leadership in your context. Jim, thanks again. And listeners, we'll see you next time.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining us on this episode of the Concordia Publishing House Podcast. I pray that this time was valuable to your walk with Christ. We'd love to connect with listeners on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter at Concordia Pub. Visit cph.org for more resources to grow deeper in the gospel.